There are lofty expectations for the Philadelphia 76ers this year after a successful offseason which included adding Paul George and a number of other notable talented players. Daryl Morey continues to work the phone, and there is plenty of conversation on who that final roster spot will be used for. However, it may come down to KJ Martin to ultimately decide the ceiling of his team, with his contract playing a key role in the final pieces being put together. I've talked a lot about what this final roster spot could be, a lot about Marcus Morris on this channel, but when truly diving into what could be a needle mover to make this team the legitimate championship threat that they desire to be, I do think it's fairly unlikely that 14th spot does have much of a swing. But where I do think that there is a chance is in that final move and that trade, which is the reason that they did sign KJ Martin. So I want to dive into a couple potential trades to look at. Shout out to the Rights to Ricky Sanchez, who broke down on their website a number of possible trades. I want to get into the finances and everything else. And just for reference to dive into what the specifics, shout out to Brian Tuparik for writing this on Forbes, that he writes that the Philadelphia 76ers continued their offseason spending spree Friday by re-signing forward KJ Martin to a 2-year, $16 million contract per ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski. They're now well over the NBA's $170.8 million luxury tax threshold and right around the $178.1 million first apron, but they're still well below the $188.9 million second apron, which is what you do want to stay under for a number of restrictive reasons. If you're surprised by the size of Martin's contract, you can thank the NBA's new collective bargaining agreement for that. Under the previous CBA, there really was only one apron. Teams above that threshold were allowed to take back 125% of the salary that they sent out in trades, plus $100,000. Under the current CBA, teams over the first apron aren't allowed to take back a single dollar more in salary than they send out. That's why the Sixers gave Martin the contract they did. In essence, he's now a human trade exception. So I'm going to dive into what those possibilities can be and what this means for the Sixers team. But first, we're going to take a quick break for our sponsor and be right back on the other side.
And while the Sixers have to put their hands together and pray that their star players can be healthy for the playoffs and give this team a chance, you are in control of preventing any crippling damage that could be occurring to your computer and other devices. The best way to do this is by utilizing NordVPN and clicking the link in the description to this video. Whether it is the risk of free public Wi-Fi, phishing scams, password attacks, ransomware, malware, or whatever next tactic is up hackers' sleeve, it is important to be one step ahead. A VPN stands for a virtual protective network, which masks your IP address and prevents anyone who shouldn't have access to your data from having it. But what's different about NordVPN is its trademark Threat Protection Pro and advanced dark web monitoring. So whether you're a frequent user of your local coffee shop shady Wi-Fi, constantly getting emails that you can't tell are legit, or use the same password for every platform, NordVPN is the best way to make sure you're covered. With robust encryption, 24/7 customer support, and up to 10 devices being able to be protected under the same account, NordVPN is a full-service experience with the mission to make the internet a better place. So click the link below for access to an exclusive offer from us here at Sixers Digest for 4 months of additional services, along with Nord's risk-free 30-day money-back guarantee.
So in addition to Brian Tuparik taking a look at the financial options, he did break down a little bit of the most common kind of names that are in the mix here. So I'm going to start off by taking a look at that, and actually let's take a bigger view here, which he writes, to get up to Brooklyn forwards net Dorian Finney-Smith, which has been a popular name connected to the Sixers, his $14.9 million cap hit, for instance, the Sixers would either have to include one or two of their other non-minimum contracts, meaning Kelly Oubre, Caleb Martin, Andre Drummond, or Jared McCain, or they would have to aggregate multiple minimum contracts, such as Eric Gordon, Kyle Lowry, and Ricky Council IV. Players such as Washington Wizards forward Kyle Kuzma, $23.5 million cap hit, which is another popular name, and Atlanta Hawks wing Bogdan Bogdanovic with a $17.3 million cap hit, now be effectively out of reach for the Sixers this season. Instead, they'll likely have to train their sights on players earning in the $12 to $13 million or less. This group includes Toronto Raptors big man Kelly Olynyk, Memphis Grizzlies big man Brandon Clark, Hawks forward Larry Nance Jr., and Suns forward Royce O'Neal. Cheaper alternatives could include Charlotte Hornets forward Cody Martin, if you want to do a little twin power there, pair him up with Caleb, Oklahoma City Thunder forward Kendrick Williams, who I do want to dive into a little deeper here, Washington Wizards forward Sadiq Bey, and Wizards forward Corey Kispert. So a couple names to get in the mix there. Couple names to get in the mix there, but I do want to talk a little bit about the most common trade options, and shout out to Mike O'Connor of the Rights to Ricky Sanchez, who did write these. So I want to dive into the first one that I really liked here. I'm going to give you 3 specific trades. One of them I think is a pipe dream. One of them I think is definitely a likely on the table situation, and the other one I could see happening. This is the one that I do think is absolutely could be on the table, could see happening, and I would put pretty likely in one that I do really like for the Sixers perspective. So his full trade, he has the Sixers getting Kendrick Williams from the Oklahoma City Thunder. on the proposed trade that he did put together was KJ Martin, a 2026 second-round pick, a 2027 second-round pick via Milwaukee, and a 2029 second-round pick. So 3 second-rounders and KJ Martin. And O'Connor writes that Williams' most appealing quality is that he's a smart team defender. He's the type of player that would make the Sixers defense more connected with his mere presence. The rest of his game is passable, while not great. He's a solid passer, capable three-point shooter, and is an above-average rebounder for his size. He would help the Sixers' biggest need, which is rebounding, while also making a positive impact defensively. He would immediately become the most natural power forward on roster. While he likely isn't good enough to overtake Martin or Oubre in the starting lineup, he could play in high leverage moments if needed. And to take a look at what he brings from a statistical standpoint, doesn't particularly shine at 4.7 points per game, 3.0 rebounds, 1.3 assists, which is a pretty impressive total there, and did shoot 39.7% from beyond the arc there, as well as 40.9% on corner threes. He is listed at just 6'6", but he is a guy that I think plays far bigger than that frame, and I've also been very much impressed with his passing every time that I've watched him. That for a guy who is a true power forward and is strong as an ox, he's a guy that battles on the boards. I do think he would be competitive for that starting power forward role, but do generally agree with the premise. The starting lineup would likely stay intact with Oubre and Martin maintaining in the mix there, but for certain matchups, Kendrick Williams would absolutely give these Sixers something that they don't have at this point in that physical bruising power forward who can help out with the boards, and he would be the best rebounder on the Sixers roster. So that to me is something that is very appealing from the Sixers perspective. Now another guy that I do think would be a huge addition to this team, I'm going to dive into the second trade here from, once again, writes Tyrese Sanchez, and it writes that the Sixers get Jared Vanderbelt in exchange for KJ Martin, Adem Bona, a 2016 first-round pick. That would be what the Lakers getting in return, and this is a 3-team deal in which the Pistons help make it work with Reggie Jackson, a 2029 top 50 protected second-round pick, going back to Detroit. So I feel a little bit bad for Reggie in this situation, but this is for the financial standpoint. And to break it down fully, he writes that this type of 3-team trade is one that I imagine will be quite popular this year because this trade involves 2 teams who are over the apron, the Sixers and Lakers. The inclusion of a third team is essential because it allows for both of these teams to be able to send out more money than they are taking back. The Pistons just act as a facilitator, taking back some salary in order to get a minor asset in return. As for why this trade makes sense, Vanderbilt is exactly what the Sixers need. His elite rebounding and defensive versatility fill major holes in their front court, and he signed to a reasonable contract through 2027. He's a non-shooter, but is a useful dunker spot guy who will be able to share the court just fine with Embiid. He can also play some backup center in a pinch. So I think it's a little bit overly optimistic to be relying on that backup center role, and I do think it would be unfortunate to give up Adem Bona, who I do believe in the long run and have been really impressed with the motor that he brings to the table from day one. But Vanderbilt does scratch an itch that I think this Sixers team needs. And to dive into the stats of what he brings to the table here, 5.2 points per game, 4.8 rebounds, 1.2 assists, 1.2 steals per game. As he mentioned, that the three-point percentage is just not there, 29.6%. He is 6'8", so good size, and still just 25 years old, so could be optimistic that he could improve from a shooter. I'm not really particularly overly optimistic in that, but when I really dive down on what ways can the Sixers team not get over the top, one that I don't think has been talked about enough has been that perimeter defense. When you think about matching up with the Boston Celtics of the world, the New York Knicks of the world, that who are the guys that you're throwing on? The Jaylen Browns, the Jason Tatums, the Mikal Bridges, these type of players that will have some creation ability on the perimeter. I don't love the Sixers options. That currently, yes, Paul George is a very good 3-and-D wing. He's not the defender he once was, but still a guy that I can feel comfortable in those type of opportunities, and I think can look those guys eye to eye as far as a one-on-one setting. But then when you look beyond that, not as optimistic. Kelly Oubre had kind of an outlier season as a defender, and while I still believe in him, I think Kelly's best asset as a defender is when he is facing off with the Jalen Brunson type players. That I think he's at his best when he can give a little bit of space, use his additional length to swallow it up. I thought he did a great job on Brunson, but again, when talking about these Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum type players, I don't know if I love that matchup as much. Caleb Martin is competitive. He is a dog. He is going to compete, and I do think we'll absolutely get the opportunity for it, but I still am a little skeptical if that is quite good enough in every single situation, which is why I think a player like Jared Vanderbelt would be really interesting to add to the mix there. Now, the third trade that I did want to dive into, I do think is a bit more of a pipe dream, but I did want to pull this up specifically and have some notes that I do want to dive into on it. That is for Lauri Markin, who has been talked about as quite the trade piece for the Sixers team. And in the piece on writes Ricky Sanchez, it writes that this piece together, KJ Martin, Kelly Oubre, Jared McCain, 4 first-round picks, and 2 second-round picks. And he even acknowledged it, saying, "Here's where things get a little bit nuts. The Sixers could pull off this trade salary-wise, but after completing the deal, they would be forced to either let Markin walk or lock themselves into the second apron hell for years to come. That would involve not only a ridiculous tax bill that Josh Harris is unlikely to pay, but also major penalties and restrictions around improving the roster. That said, I'd be lying if it doesn't sound pretty sweet to have a starting five of Maxey, Caleb Martin, Paul George, Lauri Markkanen, and Joel Embiid locked in for a few years. The rest of the roster after this year would be limited to minimum contracts and undrafted free agents, but I can't say it doesn't sound fun. And there are a lot of restrictions that come with it, but that is a nasty starting five right there. I think the best in the NBA, and I think that would be even better than a team like the Boston Celtics, who kind of embraced the same fate by going above the second apron and paying everyone because they do believe they have enough talent in store, and I think it would be a similar case with this here. Now, I don't think this is super likely for starters because as I record this, we are on a deadline day for an extension for Lauri Markkanen. The indications seem to be that he's going to push off this extension. There's no doubt that Lauri Markkanen is going to receive a healthy payday, but kind of the dance that is being done here is there is a 6-month period in which he cannot be traded after filing his extension. So by putting this off by literally a day or two, he can extend that past the NBA trade deadline and more or less give himself a 1-year no trade clause by making that. So I do think Lauri's kind of eyeing that and wants to be in a little bit more control of his fate. He has been a guy that's been traded before and has been constantly dangled in trade conversations throughout his Jazz tenure, so it wouldn't surprise me if he just wants to settle down and know where he's going to be for the entirety of the year, which unfortunately does seem to be in Utah because he is an incredibly talented player who could help out this Sixers team and any team. Just last season, 23.2 points per game, 8.2 rebounds, 39.9% from 3, and 43.6% from the corner. That's absurd stuff from a real deal 7-footer who does this running around screens, running off pin downs, can put the ball on the floor, attack the basket, and create himself. He's a really special player beyond what he's gotten credit for, and I would love him on this Sixers team. I do think that's a pipe dream, and I also note that if push comes to shove and ultimately that they are working together to get him to another destination, there's a number of teams that could straight up outbid the Sixers team. But the reality is, it will come down to what is done with this KJ Martin contract. That is likely to be the final piece for the Sixers team to acknowledge a little bit of what the depth chart looks like. Now, you can see this team looks pretty complete. You can see the guard talent. It is that power forward spot that particularly is worrisome there. KJ Martin hold things down as the backup, but a guy that I like KJ Martin. He grew on me as the year went on last year, that I thought he got really comfortable in his role and found a way to impact winning in pretty minimal opportunity, which is a huge testament to him. But the reality is they do need a big body that can help rebound. They could use some more perimeter defense, and the best way to achieve any of those things is by using that contract as a trade chip. That was the plan when they signed him, and I don't expect Daryl Morey to move on from that very easily. So that is really what we've been waiting for on this time. But I do want to hear from you guys. What did you think of those trade targets specifically? Any other names that you do want to throw in the mix and you're concerned? I'll also just add a little bit that when kind of diving into these options once again, I'm really much of the mindset that I would much prefer them hold on to these other key pieces, the Caleb Martins, the Kelly Oubres, Jared McCain even are guys that I do want to stick it up for and want around for the long haul. So while I understand that you have to obviously give to get in this league, and that is the real thing, the best part of the Paul George signing to me was the fact that the Sixers did not have to dig into these draft picks. This is the type of opportunity where you can flip those picks and get something great in return, using KJ Martin's salary as the filler and those draft picks as the real prize. So I think that should be the mentality. And that could change throughout the season depending on what we're seeing with the Sixers team, or if there's a little ingredient to a championship contender that isn't there that we expect it to be. But I would prefer that this core is already solid. We know what the depth chart looks like, and you're just looking for that one piece to add rather than giving some away. So use KJ Martin's contract, use those draft picks, and let's see what we get come deadline time. But I'm pretty excited about how this team is stacking up right now. Let me know if you guys are on the same page as me. Drop your comments below. Also, make sure you're smashing that subscribe button and dropping a like on this video if you have not already. I'll be talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.